Let me tell the tale of Zillah, first loved of Cain, first wife of Cain, the sweetest blood, the softest skin, the clearest eyes. Alone of Cain's newest childer, did Cain desire her. And she was not mindful of his desire, turning away from him. Not gifts, not sacrifices, not perfumes, not doves, not beautiful dancers, not singers, not oxen, not sculptures, not beautiful clothes. Nothing would turn Zillah's heart from stone to sweet fruit. So Cain pulled at his beard, and tore at his hair, and took to roaming the wilderness at night, thinking of her, burning for her. And one night came upon an old crone singing to the moon. Cain said to the crone, "Why do you sing so?" And the crone replied, "Because I yearn for what I cannot have." Cain said to the crone, "I yearn also. What can one do?" The crone smiled and said, "Drink of my blood this night, Cain, father of kindred, and return tomorrow night. Then will I tell you the wisdom of the moon." Cain drank at the crone's bare neck and departed. The next night, Cain found the crone sleeping on a rock. "Wake up, crone," Cain said. "I have returned." The crone opened one eye and said, "I dream of the solution for you this night. Drink once more of me, and then return tomorrow night. Bring a bowl of clay. Bring a sharp knife. I will have your answer then." Once again, Cain took blood from the crone, who immediately fell back into a deep slumber. When Cain returned the next night, the crone looked up at him and smiled. "Greetings, Lord of the Beast," the crone said. "I have the wisdom you seek. Take some of my blood into the bowl you have, and mix in these berries and these herbs, and drink deep of the elixir. You will be irresistible. You will be potent. You will be masterful. You will be ardent. You will be glowing. The heart of Zillah will melt like the snow in spring." And so Cain drank from the crone's elixir, because he was so in love with Zillah, and he so desired her love in return. And the crone laughed. The crone laughed aloud. She had tricked him. She had trapped him. Cain was angry beyond compare. Cain reached out with his powers to rend this crone apart with his strength. The crone cackled and said, "Do not!" And Cain could do nothing against her. The crone chuckled and said, "Love me." And Cain could do nothing but stare into her ancient eyes, desire her leathery skin. The crone laughed and said, "Make me immortal." And Cain embraced her. She cackled again, laughed with pure ecstasy of the embrace, for it did not pain her. "I have made you powerful, Cain of Enoch, Cain of Nod, but you will forever be bound to me. I have made you master of all, but you will never forget me. Your blood, potent as it is now, will bond those who drink it, as you did once a night for 3 nights. You will be the master. They will be your thrall, as you are mine. For though Zillah will love you, as you wanted, you will love me forever. Go now, and claim your lovely bride. I will wait for you in the darkest places, while I brew more potions for your health." And so, heavy-hearted, Cain returned to Enoch, and each night, for 3 nights, Zillah drank from her sire, though she did not know it. And on the 3rd night, Cain announced he would marry Zillah, his sweetest child, and she agreed. Greetings, Cainites. I am Maquette. Welcome back to our bastion of faith in He who is our Dark Father. We have been discussing during our sermons of the Dark Moon the paths of enlightenment that we, the Black Hand, participate in. And tonight is no different. Tonight we shall be discussing the necromantists. Tonight we will be discussing the Reapers. Tonight we discuss the adherents to the path of death and the soul. Now, I've heard many stories of where the death and the soul may have come from, but to me, the one story that makes the most sense is that this is a relatively new path of enlightenment to the Sabbat, one that would have come to us in the late 90s, when we were lucky enough to find our new allies, back when we acknowledged our clans, and those who hid in the Shadowlands from their father's betrayal for millennia hid and waited until the time was right. When the Harbingers of Skulls came and joined the ranks of Cainites for our revenge, not only against the Camarilla, but also the hated necromancers of the Giovanni. You see, the Giovanni were never loyal to anyone, only to themselves. And the Harbingers of Skulls, they know firsthand what it is to be betrayed by their dark ancestor. The Harbingers of Skulls brought with them a path to follow, a path of death and the soul, a path of survivalists, most likely the most scholarly path within the Sword of Cain. But, as I go on, let us give thanksgiving to our Dark Father and participate in the Vauldery. First and foremost, the blade. Now, in Cain's name, for the glory of the Dark Father, as we discuss here the ways of possibly following his lessons through the long night of eternity that we follow. Blessed be thy Cain, Dark Father. Please pass this around, and we shall sip in thanksgiving. Now, where Path of Cain is dedicated to the research of kindred memory, where learning how each individual of the Cainite race has existed throughout time, where Path of Cathari is developed to indulge in the vices that the beast allows, the Path of Death and the Soul is dedicated to study. They learn how exactly the human condition can be overcome by finding the chinks in its armor, with a little bit of application of other thoughts. This can also be set to our brothers and sisters who are brainwashed by the betrayers, the traitors, the clans, those too weak to break free and be of their own free will. Oh. Thank you. We gather on the night of the dark moon, where the sun's rays have no possible way of interrupting us, and we give thanks. Hail, Cain. Now, where was I? The path of death in the soul is practiced by many of our followers, even our dear Cardinal and previous Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Vicos, practices the academic path of death in the soul and what it can get to us. It's more of a scientific path than it is a religious leaning. There are so many of us who have been brought up in the time of enlightenment that following into the cultish relations of the other paths of enlightenment don't truly feel right to them. And this path has more of a scholarly bend than most. We don't send Reapers out on recruitment missions. We very rarely send them out to destroy victims haphazardly. These are our planners. These are our strategists. They are the ones who can organize a war party, who can bring down an entire Elysium in one shot. The necromantists are the ones who can interrogate the souls of victims that left us too soon, before they could actually give us the information that we wanted. The necromantists are the thinkers. All right, everybody. So we are on Path of Death and the Soul. This is a very interesting path of enlightenment. I have seen some proof that this path did come from older sources. But the thing that makes the most sense to me is that when the Harbingers of Skulls eventually joined the Sabbat back in the late 90s, that is when this would have come. Because this is more of a perverted, darker version of the Path of Bones that the Hecate or the Giovanni would follow. And the Harbingers of Skulls were actually the leftover remnants of the Cappadocians that had escaped the purge from the Feast of Folly. These are ancient vampires who found that the feudal practices of the Sabbat seemed to work best. Now, when we look into what our dear book, Sabbat the Black Hand, has to say, and this is the antagonist book that we have been given, it says, the premise of the Path of Death and Soul is to study, understand, and master death, so that destroyed enemies remain dead. As the Sabbat understands it, the hated antediluvians have the power over life and death, according to the Book of Nod, raising the question of whether or not, should the Sabbat destroy one of the third generation, the vampire will stay dead. Those who follow this path intend that they should do so at whatever cost to themselves. In the Gehenna War, they are often strategists and engineers. Away from the war front, they research and develop new ways to express the gifts of Cain. The Path of Death and the Soul is likely the most esoteric and academic of the Sabbat paths of enlightenment, concerned as it is with outward manifestations of the kindred condition. As such, it is also the most precarious of the paths for actually managing one's beast, which the necromantists handle by trying to keep the beasts at arm's length, unlike other Sabbat. This makes them no less terrifying, of course. A necromantis is perhaps most at ease when surrounded by mortals begging for their lives, because it means that, as a predator, he's doing what he's good at. The followers of the path of death and the soul are also the most likely to have embraced their childhood traditionally, preferring a more discriminating choice of progeny than a mass embrace yields. This all makes an amazing amount of sense when you stop and think about it, because these are the vampires who are more scientifically minded. You can't just go out, hit a bunch of people over the head with shovels, and hope you get a good amount of adherence to this. You need to find individuals who are already obsessed with death and try to find a scientific leaning towards it. The kind of individual who would weigh the body at the time of death to try to see if they lose any weight because the soul left the body. People who perform those kinds of experiments are really going to be the individuals who fall into this category. And when you play a character who's on Death and the Soul, I think the best way that I've seen it was the way that Sasha Vikos is described when saying that they're observing a person, that they watch people in a detached fascination as if they were a child watching a goldfish in a bowl. Now, it goes on to say that the ethics of the path are leave no survivors at the conclusion of a violent conflict. So, leave no survivors at the conclusion of a violent conflict. I think that's pretty outstated right there. Investigate the relics and remains of death, personal, historical, occult, in order to discern the details of how the conflict ended and its existential outcomes. So you're not just looking at the physical when something happens. You're looking at what it caused. So if you chose a victim, you would not only watch the death process, watch the light leave from their eyes, and then turn around and also watch as the body goes through the natural processes of decomposition, but you would also watch the various changes that it has in the local society that individual had. How does the family react? How do the friends act? If they were a churchgoer, how does the church react? Is this a person who is just forgotten when they're gone, or have you created waves that have affected the entire community? Hasten death's arrival from the humblest insect to a much lamented flower of human life. So, do not be discriminatory on what you're killing. Be discriminatory of the effects. But these are the type of people who will kill for the sake of killing. They see an insect crawling on the wall, they're most likely going to slowly crush it beneath their finger, savoring every crack and snap of its exoskeleton between their fingers. These are the people who are not going to just wait around to kill, they're going to kill for killing's sake. These are your serial killers. They really are. But they're not the serial killers who are doing it out of pleasure. They're more doing it out of study. In Chronicles, followers of the path of death and the soul are systematic thinkers and give great consideration to the outcome of their plans. They act with calculated precision, leaving as little to chance as possible, from knowing exactly who they're sending into the conflict to projecting how many Cainites a tiny domain may sustain 3 decades after claiming it. Interactions with them are detached, even chilling, as they consider how best to use the people talking to them, or how their deaths could be turned to the necromantist's advantage. Necromantists face the opposition on their own terms, choosing the theater of conflict when they can, and avoiding it altogether as a preferred option. Much better to send followers of the other paths to do the dirty work, and shovelhead more replacements afterwards. These Sabbat would rather destroy an enemy with a decisive ambush rather than an open battle. They certainly have no interest in a fair fight or any imagined honor among foes. So they're not going to do what's honorable. They're going to do what's logical. And I think that's something that a lot of people just don't realize, is how honor-bound a lot of vampires actually are. They have so much thought in the self-worth, and that their word should be golden. That if you have anything else, it is your word, and that is it. However, these individuals they're gonna take the easy way out. They're going to make sure they survive, not because of some honor-bound need or a tradition to do what's right deep down, but because they are going to be the last ones standing and replacing shock troops. And most of the other paths are shock troops in their opinions. But the path of death and the soul are the ones who are going to hold the knowledge when Cain returns. Now, for disciplines, it says that many followers of this path are especially adept at the binding and rebuking uses of oblivion, as well as developing ceremonies of their own. Auspex, blood sorcery, and dominate also have a place in the necromantist's arsenal. Now, what that's basically saying is we are looking at the Hecata branch of oblivion. We're looking at the necromantic practices, and that a lot of these individuals are actually going to end up having rituals that they themselves have created outside of the standard things that you would see in regular Hecata practices, because they're not looking for ways to the Shadowlands or anything like that. They're looking for ways of sending individuals to the Shadowlands. Now, that it right there is what this book, this monster manual, says about Path of Death and the Soul, because this book is literally dedicated to the outside view of the Sabbat. So what we're looking at is what the Camarilla and the Anarchs see in these hated, terrifying, terrorist, vampiric supremacy foes. There are other ways of looking into it. You'll see that there are a level of ethics to this path that you follow that you could very well take and turn into your convictions if you were to play a character who is on Path of Death and the Soul. The standard ethics are study the transition of life to death. So in other words, when you're killing, you're not killing for the sake of killing. You're killing because you need to see where the differences lie in the individuals who are dying under what circumstances. You don't kill for the sake of killing, you kill for the study of it. There's only by classifying the irrational can one be truly rational. So in other words, you need to find a way to step outside of those things that have no answer. You need to put the answer onto things. It's a very scientific path. Do not fear death, for the soul is immortal, which means that individuals who are on this path not only believe in an afterlife because they've been studying wraiths, but there's a good chance that they could very well believe in reincarnation, or at least continuing on their studies on the other side of the shroud itself. By understanding the rational mind, one can catch glimpses of the irrationality of the soul. That basically means that studying the way people live before they die can also answer questions for how those individuals are going to behave on the other side of the shroud. Attempt to understand as much as possible. Do not write anything off as that's just the way it is. There is always a reason, and it is your job as a follower of this path to figure that out. Explore your emotions, but never indulge in them. When you feel that you have an emotion, figure out why. What is setting it off? Find a way to detach yourself from it. Never act on them, but be aware of them. except that everything follows some patterns, even when you do not understand these patterns. So, in other words, continuously look into why specific things happen the way that they do. Now, in the older systems, there used to be a hierarchy of sins, just like all other paths. And these things would be such as preventing death is something that you should never do. All things must die. Don't meddle in the universe's cycle. Killing without studying death. You don't just kill. That's why the Harbingers of Skulls, or why individuals who follow this path, don't tend to just be on the battlefield. There's no time to actually study what's going on. They are better suited for kidnapping individuals and slow, excruciating assassinations. Murder offers no opportunity to increase insight. It makes a lot of sense. Showing compassion. Suffering is a step towards inevitable death. So the reason why you separate yourself from your compassion is because you're separating yourself from your humanity. Your humanity is a sign of death, because death is the one thing that all humans do. And the goal of an individual who is on this path is to literally be the last individual standing on the dust pile. Showing an aversion to death. Death is a doorway between the material and the eternal. It must be embraced and acknowledged. So, whereas you are not trying to die, when it is your time, you do have to accept that fact. Not pursuing enlightenment. The purpose of the path is to increase knowledge. So, in this case, enlightenment is knowledge. You are trying to become more intelligent as you go. Not killing when useful or necessary. Make death a tool. Kill selectively and learn from the victim's passing. So you're not just going around committing wanton destruction. That's just not what these people do. They're very analytical. Frenzying. The impulses of the beast don't lead to acknowledgement. You are above human, so do not act like an animal. Being guided by emotions. Emotions may be studied as expressions of the soul, but they aren't useful in cultivating functional understanding. So in other words, you need to act on logic, not on emotion. And then also there's fearing final death. All souls return to the cycle. Final death is not the death of the soul. And then attachment to the living world. The material world is ultimately ephemeral and of limited use in gathering understanding. So this means to not get caught up in the humanizing of the world. And when it is time to release yourself from this existence and move on to something else, do not hesitate, because you can always learn other things. I think that's actually how the survivors of Kamakali, the Feast of Folly, I'm pretty sure that's how they were able to survive as long as they did, and how they possibly gained the ability to feed off of the wraiths, such as the Nagaraja do as well. This path of enlightenment is just one of those that tends to be more academic than religious. This is a perfect path for individuals who happen to be atheists in the Sabbat, where you can allow other individuals to be wrong. This is a chance for those of you who are part of the Sabbat simply because the actions and practices of the organization work for you, even if you don't fully believe in the Cain mythos itself. And as long as you keep your mouth shut about that, you possibly can get away with it. I love Death in the Soul. I was very lucky to have a character who did not practice Death in the Soul itself, but he had to emulate it for his own survival from time to time. And getting to know exactly how this path works was very interesting. I've always loved the religious aspect of playing Sabbat. The zealotry of it was just something that really called my attention. But for those of you who do not care for the zealotry and are in it for darker reasons, or the ability to just study a vampire's darker nature, this is a great path for that purpose. And you should probably give it a try. Now, for those of you who are using the non-canonical book, the Sabbat Playing the Black Hand, which was written by some people who have also worked on actual World of Darkness material, there is a very good understanding of how to express this path in that book. And as I said with the other ones, until somebody steps forward and says they don't want me to do it, I'm going to go ahead and read those off here as well. That book says, in the Sabbat, the Reapers have a reputation as cold, and the Rite are often reserved. They see Cain as a rebel and explorer, unwilling to compromise or be held back by the limits of death. Those on this path seek the secrets of death and undeath, not to better understand their own condition, but to conquer it. While necromancies perform experiments and research the mysteries of undeath, they see themselves more as artists than cold practitioners. They are inspired by the restless dead and frequently welcome possession and communion with the spirit world. Reapers believe the antediluvians have grown too powerful to succumb to traditional methods of destruction, and that stories of their demise are the great lie meant to hide them until Gehenna's closing acts. It will take more than a stake, fire, or sunlight to kill these blood gods, and death itself must serve the sword if they are to prevail. Now, that does make a lot of sense when you look into some of the stories that we've heard in the past, such as I can think of at least 3 times that the Tzimisce antediluvian has been attacked and killed and has come back. The Lasombra antediluvian is said to be walking around the Middle East right now, even though they were destroyed by a group of anarchs, both Lasombra and Banu Hakim. The Ravno antediluvian is said to be dead now, and I do see a little bit more possibility in that, but I'm also starting to gain an appreciation for the idea that generation, or at least blood potency itself, is cyclical. And there's a good chance that when they wake up, they are so weak that they might as well be young neonate vampires, or at least on elder terms, where they could possibly be easily destroyed until they break their fast on the first part of their children. Now, for role-playing, it says that Reapers prefer functional and dark clothing, but many take on a goth look, as spirits seem drawn to that aesthetic. Reapers are quiet, and even their takbers are understated and matter-of-fact. They see emotion as weakness of the living. Reapers prefer undead servants, but are notorious for flesh-crafting monstrous ghouls. So the idea of individuals who practice vicissitude and being on this path are a thing. 'Cause I could actually see the idea of rising, shambling hordes as your servants, is having zombie servants, but also using fleshcraft to make them worse, to make them more dangerous, to make them more apt at carrying larger things. Now, as the other book said, this one also has their nicknames as the Necromancy and the Reapers. Their takbers are Death is a Doorway, Cain's Blood Conquers All, and the quiet lyrical chant of Undead, 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 bringing to mind the Bauhaus, Bela Lugosi is dead, in my mind. The priesthood, it says that the clergy of death and the soul is almost non-existent outside of individual pack priests. Their rite are often marked by the symbology of death. Skulls, keys, and grave dirt are common implements, and dead packmates are ritually invited to celebrate the Rite alongside their old comrades. Reapers are superb caretakers and will often relinquish power without any hard feelings if approached respectfully. I kind of like the idea of that also, the fact that they are so logical that if you come up to them not emotionally driven, and just go, I believe that I may be able to be a better pack leader than you, and here is why, and you can present your argument well, they'll step down and let you take over. And I like that. I like that a lot. I also like that idea of dead packmates being invited ritualistically to take part in the Rite. It reminds me of a practice called Dumb Supper, where on Halloween night you set a plate for your departed family members, and you eat in silence as a communion with them. It does feel kind of like that. Touchstones for Reapers. Reapers almost always connect their convictions to the creation rites, the Festival of the Dead, or the Vaulderie Rite. Now, most paths of enlightenment are going to connect with the Vaulderie Rite. That's a no-brainer, because what you're doing is you're creating a diluted blood bond between you and your pack so that you can get along. So that does make a lot of sense. The Festival of the Dead would be honoring of the dead. And then also the creation rites were something that were brought in by the Tzimisce that were taught to them by the Cappadocians in the Dark Ages. Anyway, this is after you have been inducted and you've passed whatever initiations you need to, where they ritualistically bury their members, and then they have to dig themselves out of their own graves. A very quick, easy, sloppy way of doing this is the shovel party, which most individuals who practice this path of enlightenment do not participate in, because the adherents are just too randomized at that point, and they want specific individuals for this. Frenzy. Reapers always attempt to resist frenzy, as they see the loss of control to the beast as a tactical mistake, if not a weakness. They gain the standard bonus to all rolls to resist frenzy equal to 1/3 of their humanity rating. That's very neat. And for those of you who do not understand, this book right here has it so that a path of enlightenment is effectively stacked on top of your humanity, and where you do have certain ways of being able to back out of the way that humanity works due to the way that your convictions and your touchstones and the Sabbat work, you still have to maintain that humanity rating, because that stops you from falling to the beast. Path compulsion for the necromists is necro-curious. The Reaper becomes obsessed with the spiritual and necromantic properties of something in their immediate vicinity. If the target of their interest is a mortal, they may kill it and study it elsewhere, but otherwise they will investigate the location with obsessive interest. If they do not satisfy their curiosity by the end of the scene, they suffer a 2-trait penalty to all rolls for the rest of the night. Now, I know I've covered this before, but if you have a path compulsion, basically you are allowed to choose if you are going to if you are going to fall to a compulsion and you're playing a Sabbat from this book, from this homebrew book, you basically get to choose whether you're going to suffer from your clan compulsion or your path compulsion when that comes up, because sometimes one might be better than the other given the circumstances. And I can really see that anybody who's on Path of Death and the Soul is probably just going to gravitate towards this regardless of anything else. Conviction. The Reapers prefer convictions that focus on the restless dead. They deny existential dread and devalue all living things. So in other words, when you're picking your convictions, you're going to want to take things that more along the lines separate you from life itself. The examples of convictions are going to be never fear death, which is a very human thing. Fearing what you don't understand is considered a very human, mortal thing. Never leave a loose end. So make sure that there's no victims that have lived during a violent situation, such as the other book had said. Never deny your curiosity. Never refuse the dead their due. So if someone has earned something, even in death, you are going to want to repay what they have earned. Never side with the living. That makes a lot of sense in my opinion. The idea that you are going to just deny the fact that humans are a thing to you. You're really going to want to see them as under your notice. And then never deny the inevitable. That is a lot of emotion right there. Individuals who tend to argue with facts tend to be over emotional, and that's something that this path denies. Now, Path of the Death and the Soul has advantages, much like every other path of enlightenment. It says that the reapers are tied to the dead, and their rituals are perfect playground for malevolent spirits, ghosts, and the restless dead. Though they embrace their recruits with the creation rites, reapers are creative experimenters and have found other ways to make use of this rite. Now it says, and these are fun, it says that you have the zombie rites. Now, though you need to go into detail on how these things actually work. You have the possibility of having up to 3 points in this, so you can take a 1 and a 2, or you could just take the 3 and be done with it. But we'll just go ahead and go over these. You have the zombie rites. The pack can use the creation rites to raise savage dead from recently deceased corpses. No more than 2 or 3 can be created per session, and they can be difficult to control. Often packs leave them behind to rampage as they make their way out of the domain. Use the unbirthed rules in the V5 Sabbat or the white in the V5 core book for stats. So you actually can use the creation rites that you would use to initiate new vampires on corpses, and that will create zombies. A 2-point advantage is corpse eaters. Everyone in the pack with the proper path residence can feed on blood from corpses as if they had the iron gullet feeding merit. Bagged or preserved blood from the living is still inedible, though. So you have to eat from corpses. So what this is actually getting at is if you have the melancholy blood resonance at that point in time, you can feed off of corpses after you've... Yeah, this is a pretty interesting thing for a pack to have. Getting into the other second one, or the other number 2, is safe passage. Reapers are keen strategists, and some have maintained a strange web of alliances and ceasefires among other creatures inhabiting the world of darkness. As long as they do not transgress, the pack can pass unmolested through territories of lupines and other creatures that recognize the treaties with the Sabbat. So this is something that you really need to get into the storyteller for, and something that I would suggest you'd need to have a hell of a background for. Why exactly would certain individuals not care if you go through this? Personally, I can see the BSDs, the Black Spiral Dancers, allowing you to get through this. I can see the Solua of the Fae allowing you to pass through. They are obsessed with the dead. And I can also see possibly the Euthanatos Mage organizations, which are all a type of necromancers, allowing you to get through this as well. Moving on to the level 3s. There are 2 level 3s. There is Deeply Haunted. The pack's haven and ritual sites always attract specters that see them as allies. These angry ghosts lash out at intruders and make short work of any uninvited spirits entering the territory. If the right favors and observances are met, these specters could be tricked or compelled into performing other tasks for the pack. Now, I can see this going on really well if the specter in question is using the pack to hold on to what's known as a memoriam, which is how wraiths get their power, being able to be remembered. And those that have already fallen to Spectre have most likely already lost most of their memoriam anyway. So they're at that point desperate to hold on. And where I don't see wraiths enjoying vampires most of the time, I could see dark pacts with these evil spirits being something that could very well be commonplace within packs that have Path of Death and Soul as their road of choice. Then we have Shadow Souls. The pack is infused with necromantic energy. All packmates can buy Oblivion powers as if it was a clan discipline. Once per story, when the pack priest performs the Vauldery, they can place the beneficial boon upon the entire pack. As long as the packmate has the proper pack resonance, they are resistant to Oblivion for the rest of the session, as any hostile Oblivion ceremony that targets or includes a packmate in its effect automatically fails. That is worth it. I mean, considering the fact that it just says Oblivion. So this could actually be any type of abyssal mysticism. This could be any kind of necromancy. I would actually say that they might even be points up when it comes to regular hostile Lasombra Oblivion. And considering the fact that the Lasombra are now joining the Camarilla in most campaigns, that's something to take into deep consideration. But that right there is the Black Hand playing the Sabbats look at Path of Death and the Soul. And I do find that book does have a lot of good points made in it, mechanically speaking. But I am Maquette, and I would like to thank you for joining me for this midnight mass and sharing the Vauldery glass with me. We will meet again when the moon is dark and we can study Path of Power and the Inner Voice. Thank you for joining me. Happy hunting.